So thanks, Sean. You know, one of the things that you'll see we've talked about today that's underlying on everything that we do is security. And so we want to bring up security now and really have a good discussion and really start to answer the question, how secure is the cloud, and can it actually be more secure than traditional in-house IT? And I'm going to let you in on a secret. The answer to that is yes, it can be. And the panel here today will talk to you about it. So to get us started, please join me in welcoming to the stage our Senior Director of Information Security Operations at Rackspace, David Newman.
Hello. So we only have about 3 hours for this panel, so we're going to jump right in. That's not true. We have about 25 or 30 minutes, but they've connected me to a taser, so if we go over time, I think I get electrocuted. I just want to thank everybody for their time. And you know, the other thing is, for all those that were involved in putting this together, what a class act. Can we get a round of applause for all of them? And this is my first solve. Let's just jump right in. This is Misha. He's the Chief Strategy Officer, co-founder of Alert Logic. And Sammy, who joins us as Principal Technologist from Cloud Passage. As you heard Ian say, you know, this is probably one of the most significant challenges that most businesses face today. You know, it's being talked about at every board, every audit committee, in every C-suite, in every industry vertical. And there's a lot of uncertainty around whether or not the cloud is secure. But here's what we know. It's a $300 billion market. And it's a $300 billion market because we know it's a business enabler. So what we're going to talk about today is that how can we really establish that trust and confidence in the cloud to protect businesses and enable them as well. So let's start there. I mean, Michel, I'll start with you. What's your perspective around why the cloud and specifically the managed services over them can be trusted and there can be confidence in how they can enable businesses?
Well, first of all, thanks for having us here. Alert Logic spends a lot of our time on security cloud environments. We're talking about thousands of sites out there. So we have a front row seat into whether cloud environments really are secure, insecure, or otherwise. You know, what we find is that the level of control that you get in cloud environments is so much higher than you have in traditional data centers. I mean, imagine a data center where everything runs in one place and your firewall looks like Swiss cheese, and over the years you kind of have this gradual decay where things get gradually more and more open. That's the inverse of what really happens with most cloud deployments that I see. We have customers that have several hundred applications in cloud environments. Those are discrete networks of their own. So if somebody breaks into one single application, they have no access to anything else. That's a game-changing architecture that's really difficult to implement in a traditional data center. Much easier to do in a cloud environment, right? There's a lot of automation. It gets much cheaper to spin up new cloud environments. So from a security perspective, security has always been a domain where you're overwhelmed, you're overworked, you don't have enough people, you can't quite figure things out. When you can start automating on the level on which we're automating right now, it's a game changer. So it really does change the paradigm of what's out there. Now, it's not always simple because security people are complicated. So security is always a complicated conversation. I should write a book about how to talk to security people. But there's always 25 new threats you've never heard of, and there's always 17 products you haven't bought yet. So if you talk about security in those mysterious terms, it is super complicated, but it doesn't have to be. I think if you talk about specific security applications for specific environments, such as cloud infrastructure, it gets much easier.
Great. And you know, Sammy, as you go around and you deal with business leaders and technologists and customers, you know, what are you hearing are their reservations, and what do you tell them and why they can trust the cloud?
Yeah, so I came from the traditional security background. I spent 10 years at RSA, so I've seen the old way of doing things. And like Misha was saying, the key challenge is a year ago, a lot of conversations were going along the lines on how can I trust that the cloud itself can be secure? But I challenged those people to say, you think you do better security all the way up to the hypervisor than, say, Amazon or Rackspace does? And at that point, you know, the number of hands is pretty low. There are probably a dozen companies in the country who can claim to do as well a job after the hypervisor. But where the things break down mentally for them is that next step. How do I maintain the visibility? And that's because they start from the old model. They think of the traditional data center tools and they're trying to repurpose them into the cloud, and that's where everything breaks. Cloud breaks traditional security.
Right. Do you think that there's enough integration between security professionals and other technology professionals to really enable those things? I mean,
Yeah,
I hate being labeled as a security professional, right? I want to be labeled as a business enabler.
Exactly.
And have
And
that
that's
There
discussion.
is a stigma, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, right, yeah. So-
That's why that's my title is so nebulous, so nobody can pin me down. They don't know what I actually do. The key is that conversation about the business enablement, and the loss of visibility is the fear that people have. And if you give them the tools to have the same visibility and control, Misha's absolutely right. You can actually isolate processes, you can isolate workloads in the cloud and in mixed environments better than you can afford to do in the data center. You look at your traditional NSX, who here has the budget to go and actually microsegment their whole rack? They can't do it because they can't afford the operational overhead. So I'd say that the security delivery has to adapt to the way the IT is delivered. IT delivery goes agile. The security delivery has to become agile too. If you don't bridge that gap and go to agile security delivery, then you're not a business enabler. You're still the Dr. No who said you can't do that. We talked to a customer who just said, when their team came in and said, hey, we'd like to use Docker and do this and that, and he said, great, here's the agent, go at it. They were shocked. They were hoping the security to say no because they weren't quite ready to move yet. Right. So they were hoping to get that pass from the security saying, that buys us another 3 months to plan.
And that's a cultural problem. I actually see way more cultural problems in security than I do technology problems. Mm-hmm. If you look at either the Amazon stack, where there's a tremendous amount of controls implemented at the cloud security service layer, right? Or Rackspace, where there's a tremendous amount of managed security options, for example. Vast majority of people that I interact with really don't consume everything that's available to them.
Sure.
Where they get stuck is this interaction between the IT team and the security team for the first couple of years of cloud adoption, until maybe 18 months ago. 100% of our conversations with cloud deployment never included security people. They weren't invited in a conversation. Usually these are the people that say no, right? When you bring them into a conversation, they slow things down, they say no, and they start to kind of pump the brakes. That's a cultural issue, right? That's because in a traditional world, you build your application, you try to deploy it, that's when security gets involved, and that's when everything slows down. We really need to rewire it to where security people are involved in actually building applications. Yeah. They should be there at the beginning saying, look, here are the controls that we need. We should source some of these on infrastructure basis and get this as part of our cloud service and get some of these on managed basis because we just don't have the people to service this, whether it's in a cloud or in a traditional data center, right? But those conversations need to start happening at the product development cycle, right? It needs to happen. I mean, those teams need to get merged somehow, right?
Yeah. That's dead on. Misha saying exactly the same thing we're saying. You have to have that operational integration from the get-go. If you have those teams engaged from the planning stages and you move to a model where the delivery is happening let's just go from traditional waterfall to DevOps is not enough. You need to go to DevSecOps and integrate the security into the planning process so it goes through the whole life cycle of the program.
Well, I think there's an operational level on top of the technology and the platforms and those kinds of things too. When I was in the military, we used to have an expression that said, you know, it's not the weapon you sling, it's the way you sling it that makes you lethal. We don't carry weapons at Rackspace, in case anybody was worried. But you know, today we are on a, you know, certainly in Rackspace Managed Security, we're on this pivot from this idea of graduated response, passive monitoring and detection, to active defense, hunting for immediate action to prevent material damage to the business. So it's more of a risk-based discussion. So I think, you know, you take the talent or the shortage of talent that's out there today, and then you really kind of combine that with all the other struggles that we have at the technology level, but then you look at really the necessities at the operational level that are really compelling, that allow you to respond when bad things do happen.
And this is where the service models are not fully baked yet. So if you look at a lot of cloud providers, and I think Amazon leads the way there, the number of security controls available on Amazon is tremendous, right? When you read the documentation for them, it's apparent that the consumer for them should really be a developer, right? It's really not written for somebody who can turn the switch on and say, I'm getting security now, right? Just at an abstract level, right? You know, some kind of security objective. It's certainly not, it's not a click and play, right? This is where Rackspace, I think, is doing a great job announcing managed services, managed security services specifically. I think that's an area that really hasn't been built out, and that's where the cloud is still not as mature as it could be. That managed security layer is still getting sorted out. I think that's a model that's just emerging, and I think it's going to be dominant in the future, but it hasn't been built out yet.
Yeah, and that's obviously a big play for us. We are really looking to fill that gap that drives business success and growth for our customers. Sammy, I mean, let's pull on that thread a little bit about that managed service layer. I mean, where do you think we go from here? We're doing a lot. I mean, what do you need to do next? What are the really advantages today, certainly in a trust in the cloud environment, that we can reap?
The key question there is exactly that. Managed services can be the only thing that saves us. I think 2014 in the US, there were 49,495 job postings that required CISSP, and there were 65,000 CISSPs in the world. So you can't hire them, you can't do it. You have to have some leverage, and the leverage comes from two avenues. It is the operational automation. Security has to be automated. That's the only new thing. All the other control objectives are the same. Nothing's changed in the world except automation. You have to now have security that operates as fast as automation allows, not as fast as you can have change control meetings, right? So that's one. And the second one is getting the leverage of having that specialized team that can help you when you need them, and have that team have the controls that allows them to know when they need to pay attention to something specific. So it's the refinement of activity into intelligence, and then having the right teams in place that have the leverage to do that at a massive scale. We're moving at a geometric scale, and we're not adding more people at that same scale, so we need to do things faster and smarter.
Yeah, and something that Misha said, go back to that earlier, is collaborating early, right? So the idea that, I mean, realistically, I believe that 80% of solid security programs are about resiliency, right? Mm-hmm. What's the resiliency there? There's not a big distinction between those things, securing and being able to have a defendable enterprise. So, as we do that, the idea of in the cloud where you can define zero trust environments, right? You can really do whitelisting at the application layer. Misha, pull on that thread a little bit when we talk about managed security and the advantages that those bring in defining architectures for the success of our customers.
Yeah, this is something that we've seen happen over the last couple of years, and this is where you start to notice that developers who normally don't think about security are starting to think about it, mostly because developers have always been kind of disenfranchised. They write the code, but the IT infrastructure team owned the data center, right? And the security people own the security layer, and then at some point it's got to get internet access, and network guys get involved. It's different in the cloud, right? They have full control over everything, and all of a sudden, the same developers that write code are starting to think, what if I treated my data center as code? What if I actually constructed this as part of my application? What if the application that I wrote was so intricately linked at the service layer to the way I actually orchestrate my infrastructure, the way I deploy my security layer, right? To where I can declare, right, if I'm going to spin up a service and it's a Java service, there's a very narrow range of access that it requires on very specific ports between very specific segments in my cloud environment. That's a big deal, right? Usually, you have to work backwards from that. Usually, the network guys have to figure that out somehow, right?
Right.
But this is developers now making those decisions. So what we see people doing these days is really start to kind of construct these new environments. And what usually happens is they'll move to the cloud, and that'll be a forklift move, right? They'll just say, I'm going to move the exact same application I had in my on-premises data center to the cloud. Then they quickly realize, I'm not getting all the benefits that were promised, right? It's supposed to be much faster, much more agile. It's supposed to be easy for me to kind of shoot and restart my cloud environments, instantiate new instances, test and develop and deploy, and it's not quite working right. That's when they go back to kind of version 2.0, and that's when security really gets rewired.
Yeah, and I think that, if we listened to TD Bank earlier, where they took exactly the opposite approach. It's like, look, this is an opportunity to do full spectrum transformation, lower cost of total cost of ownership with enabling business through, defining those applications. And,
refactoring refactoring instead of forecasting.
Right. And I think that this gives us incredible opportunities to do things in the future. So when I look at like our our OpenStack Innovation Center. You know, the idea that to collaborate across multiple sectors, multiple industries, to do things like, you know, onboard malware detonation before it ever gets a chance to get off the platform. So why don't you guys comment a little bit about that, about what do we see the future opportunities in the cloud with respect to really getting ahead of the bad guys?
I think the biggest thing that you can do there is start thinking about that environment in the terms of microservices. There's a lot of buzz about it. People are talking about Docker, the massive growth of Docker, but almost all of that today is in dev and test. Very little yet in real production. And the production instances are very specific, narrow niche things where you can do one cool trick with Docker you can't do in any other way. But if you really go towards that model, whether it's Koros or Docker or anything like that, it allows you to build applications where you're exposing as little as possible. You're no longer securing the full stack with all the services that you never need running on it. You pare down the operating system elements to bare minimum. You pare down all the libraries to bare minimum. Now, if you give yourself then the tools to still maintain the visibility and operational integration into security operations and managed services around that, that's how you can win that war. And it's not just those advanced threats and advanced tools you need. 99.4% of last year's published actual compromises were through CVEs that have been out for months.
Absolutely.
So
One year is what it takes.
yeah, the blocking and tackling is still important. You can't forget that. I mean, everybody's always chasing the new hotness. The boring stuff has to be done, and it has to be done automatically, or you're dead.
Absolutely.
You asked for one thing, but I'm going to give you two if you don't mind.
Lay it on me, brother.
I think, first of all, we have to kind of make sense of the environment we're protecting. And the reason I say that is because right now it doesn't make a lot of sense. When you talk to security people, they talk about security in very monolithic terms. And it's really kind of revolves in concentric circles around the CEO, right? That's the reason why the printers always work, but people still get broken into, right? It's because the CEOs love to print. So, you know, people are always making sure the printers are on. That's the reason why when you talk to security people, they get excited about endpoint malware, mobile devices, all the things that happen in your desktop and your browser and so on, right? When I talk to security people, when they get really excited, it's usually, you know, latest Word exploit, PDF, you know, exploit malware that uses kind of multi-step interactive ways to break into somebody, right? You know, servers don't do any of that stuff, right? Servers don't read, they don't go to websites, they don't read PDFs. You know, they do have a lot of SQL injection vulnerabilities, right? So data center security, things that run in data center environments, especially as they move to cloud environments, really start to kind of clarify things for us, right? There is a range of things we need to be able to do for on-premises data centers, and especially things that get down to the user. But servers need a totally different protection stack, right? They need a different playbook. And when you really peel back the layers, you'll notice that there are security companies that specialize in one or the other. And it's important to kind of go the right route for this, right? If your number one attack vector is your user, then maybe data center security, such as a web application firewall, is not the primary investment you should make, and vice versa, right? Now, the second thing is, everything we've been talking about here has been from the perspective of people that actually do infrastructure protection. But that's our job, right? I'm assuming that a lot of people in the audience are not security people by trade and probably own applications. I think your job as the consumers of this technology is to get smarter about asking the right questions. And I would ask those questions around the outcome. And when you do, but by the way, security shouldn't be mystical. If the answers you get don't make any sense, chances are whoever you're talking to doesn't really understand what you're trying to ask them, right? So it's not your fault for asking the wrong question. It's usually their fault for not understanding what you're trying to accomplish. The simplest questions really should be clarifying, which is, you know, last 10 incidents that you detected using your technology. And if somebody says, you know, we don't actually detect incidents, we just make the software that lets somebody else do that for you, right? That's a missing block. Who's going to do that actual monitoring, right? That starts to clarify things for you as a buyer, and this really starts to answer a lot of important questions about, is this thing really going to work? I meet a lot of security people, and I ask them, what was the last incident you detected? And they said, you know, we're not in that phase yet. We're in a phase where we buy a lot of stuff. And then next phase is where we install a whole lot of stuff. But then we're going to start looking at it, which is 3 years after the breach, right?
Well, this is another thing too. This is not a technology problem, right? Cybersecurity is not a technology. It's a business problem. It's an ops problem. And you know, as I go around and I talk to lots of leaders in different industry verticals, a common question I get, especially at the C-suite level, is like, you know, we ask, are we secure from cyber attack? And I said, well, we don't always get back an answer, one that is either clear or that we understand. Maybe it's the wrong question, or maybe it's an incomplete
question. It's too generalized
question,
of a question, right? We just listened to the Six Flags presentation, and the key word there was Drupal, right?
Yeah.
Drupal is their content management system. If you ask your security person, how do you make sure that Drupal never gets broken into? And what you hear is a whole lot of answers about the way they protect the browser. You're having a very wrong conversation.
Right. Yeah.
And it's the bottom line that you were reaching for there, which is the, if there are any CISOs here in the room, I apologize, but most of them, when push comes to shove, aren't speaking the language of business yet. They're still speaking the language of technology. And the language of business, means they need to think about this in the terms of what are the business objectives, how can enable them, and what gives me the leverage to do that with the lower resources I'm going to have next year compared to this year.
Well,
and the answer is often, let's look at the fresh page and say, if I have new applications that I can deploy in the cloud, I can do that with less money, more securely than adding them into my existing footprint. It doesn't answer the tedious challenge, which is that bimodal IT is hard.
Yeah.
It definitely is hard, but if you have these tools that give you visibility into both environments, allows you the span of control, start putting those new workloads, new systems in the cloud, get to a point where you can say every new greenfield application, every new application has to go cloud first. Then you start peeling away and you're working your way through that problem.
And we get this great positive collateral effect, right?
Yes.
So now we all start to think with a more business focus on that. Cloud gives us all these opportunities to really better integrate as teams across an organization to really deliver a lot of enablement for business.
And these apply to even environments where you're not yet in the cloud. We just talked to a customer who has nothing in the cloud, their traditional data center, but by taking this more modern approach to it, they can now say, hey, when my DevOps team wants to go and build something, I already have the tools that allows me to do that. I can say yes when they walk through the door instead of the usual no. You can be a business enable accelerator.
Yeah, absolutely. So with a couple minutes late or left, I'd like to, not late, I got late on the mind. Just want to freelance a little bit. Final thoughts from both of you on where we're at today and where we're headed tomorrow.
I think we're probably in the biggest IT transformation that I've seen since the internet days. That's really when I got my career start. Things were a lot of fun back then, and we really haven't seen a migration of this sort yet. I think, we're still in day one of the cloud adoption, right? You're right, it's a massive market, but it's still very much formative, right? When you look at, when you look at the names that are actually adopting the cloud, they sound big. But when you look at kind of the amount of infrastructure they have in cloud environments, we're talking about probably 10 to 15% of total IT. So it's just the beginning. I think as it starts to migrate, and we still have mainframes out there, right? So
Sure.
As it starts to migrate, it's really a good time to get things right. Usually, right? Usually security is something that people think about after they get broken into. As somebody who's been selling security for years, we've scared people for many years. And not a lot of it was always real, but it started to get real these days, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
we're seeing major businesses being taken out of this world at this point with breaches, and that's never happened before. So with this migration, it's a really good opportunity to kind of reevaluate what we're doing and take stock and go in a different direction.
Great. Sammy, final thoughts?
Everything that's happening today, we will look at this infrastructure transformation like, Misha was saying, it's real, it's happening at large enterprise, small enterprise. The agile IT delivery is the big change, and the most centralized functions like security have been the hardest ones to move. I think we have an opportunity now to take a step forward and maybe even do a leapfrog on that. Take the security tools that we have, the services that are now being built around those, and go to that future of the bimodal ID, allow security to take that next step before anybody else is already even ready for it. It's the opportunity for us to do, and you can't hire your way out of that. That's a fool's errand. It's not going to happen. You need to leverage people who have the leverage to do that.
Great. Well, listen, guys, I've really enjoyed spending some time both today and last night with you. Thanks for everything you're doing for the industry. Thanks for your leadership.
I was here last year. There's twice as many people here.
Twice as many
exciting.
people, and we'll have triple next year. Thanks, everyone, for your time. I appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of Solve.
Thank you.